Welcome and thank you so much for starting your day with us at this Climate Action Programme breakfast event. I hope you've all managed to get some food and step outside for a bit of fresh air this morning, and that you enjoyed that rather dramatic music. My name's Kaylee and I'm the Partnerships Communications and Engagement Coordinator. I work closely with the team to support our core programme, and I'm directly involved with the Climate Action Programme. I'm really pleased to be welcoming you to this event this morning. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. I invite you to turn your cameras off for now to help minimise the carbon footprint of the event, and to switch them back on for the Q&A and networking. We are recording this call, so if you would like to speak during the Q&A but would prefer not to be recorded, you're welcome to ask your question in the chat. The networking breakout groups won't be recorded. All the attendees are muted for now, but please feel free to use the chat. Throughout the event, we encourage you all to share your experiences and learnings with each other. And if you would like to share about this event on social media, please use the hashtag #ClimateActionBristol. Before we get started, let's just take a couple of moments to arrive. We recognise it can be difficult to stay focused on Zoom, plus it's an early start and not everyone is a morning person. But we'd love for you to be present here with us for the next hour and a half so you can fully absorb the conversations. So I encourage you to take a moment to stand up if you're able and to have a little stretch. Maybe give your arms a shake, even do some star jumps just to get the blood moving. Okay, thank you for going along with that little exercise. Hopefully you're feeling focused and energized and ready to get stuck in. A bit of background to start with. Bristol Green Capital Partnership is a unique network made up of over 1,000 member organisations from across all sectors, working towards a fast and fair response to the climate and nature crises. We think we're the largest partnership of our kind in the world, and it is our mission to work together to explore the environmental challenges our city faces and develop collaborative solutions that involve everybody. This event is part of the Climate Action Programme, which supports organisations of all sizes and sectors to reduce their carbon emissions through events, resources and peer-to-peer learning opportunities. The programme is free for organisations thanks to the support of NatWest and Bristol City Council. Through the Climate Action Programme, we hope you will feel supported and inspired to take action on the climate and nature crises, wherever you are starting from, and feel part of a community of people and organisations who are committed to positive change. This is the second Climate Action Breakfast in the series. You can view the first one on our website, where you will also find other resources to help you on your carbon reduction journey. Some useful highlights include a guide to measuring and managing carbon emissions, a spotlight on article on the circular economy for business, an infographic on transforming travel at your organisation, which is insights from the June Intention to Action clinic we held on transport, and tips from the first Climate Action Breakfast on getting started on your climate action journey. We'll share those links in the chat. Soon to be added to this suite of resources is the guide to creating an engaging climate action plan, which we are launching today. And we'd love to hear from you about some of the barriers and challenges you are facing, so we can help with identifying solutions and promoting best practice. You can share those in the chat, email us on contact@bristolgreencapital.org, or include your ideas in the feedback form for today's event. Okay, when you signed up to this event, you were asked, does your organisation have a climate action plan? And I'm going to share those results with you now. Okay, as you can see, quite a few people answered yes, it's comprehensive. So if that's you, do share your experience with everyone in the chat. And then a few need to update your plans. And most of you don't yet have a plan, or it is in progress. So hopefully by the end of this morning, you will feel better equipped to develop your plans. Okay, to start us off, today we'll be hearing from Livvy Drake. Livvy is a sustainability consultant and founder of Sustainable Sidekicks. And she's going to provide an overview of our new guide to creating an engaging action plan. She'll then be joined by two of the organisations who contributed to the guide, Zac Nicholson from Alec French Architects and Sam Willitts from University Hospitals Bristol NHS Trust, so we can hear about their experiences. You will then have an opportunity to ask questions, so do have your questions ready to post in the chat or put up your virtual hand and ask the panel directly. And for those who submitted questions when you signed up, these have been shared with Livvy, and I'm hopeful that many of them will be answered by the guide that we've created. We then have a short video to share with you about the Climate Leaders Group, which is part of the Climate Action Programme. And finally, there will be an opportunity for networking to make connections and share any reflections from the event. We'll provide the link to the full guide at the end, but first Livvy is going to talk us through the key points. So it's my pleasure to introduce Livvy Drake. Livvy has helped with putting this guide together and will speak about how to plan your organisation's carbon neutral journey. So over to you, Livvy.
Morning, everyone. I'm not actually in Bristol, I'm actually in Spain. So this is a European breakfast morning this morning. So hence why it says patatas bravas behind me. So I'm coming to you from a beach in the Delta of the Ebro. So I will start sharing my screen. And I did come over land, by the way, because that's part of my climate commitment, is to avoid air travel where possible. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and talk you through a bit about the guide. So as Kaylee said, I was, let's start from the beginning, shall we? That will be good. I was involved with the guide amongst many other people who have contributed to this. And part of my remit was to gather together how different organisations are approaching creating a climate action plan, because there's not one way to do it. And so let me carry on. And so what I'm going to do is share some content from the guide and also pepper in with a few of personal examples and examples from people who I spoke to. So why do you need a climate action plan? Now, I'm not going to tell you guys on this call that we've got a climate emergency and about the IPCC report, because you are all there with it. But what is the benefit of having a climate action plan? It's about identifying those areas for quick wins and long-term goals. It is also about involving colleagues in the development and the delivery of the plan to motivate, support and enable them to act. So many organisations or people are doing actions in their personal lives, and they want that the same in their workplace. They want their values at home and at work to be aligned. So it's important that people feel that they're working for an organisation that's aligned. So it's a great way of demonstrating your commitment to your team. And tracking progress by developing a monitoring and reporting framework. And there is the guide to help with monitoring and measuring. And also to show your organisation's genuine commitment to your climate ambitions to customers, clients and employees. And I know with the people that I work with that so many organisations are now being asked to act because their scope 1 emissions are other people's scope 3 emissions. So people are saying, look, you're in my supply chain, you're my scope 3 emissions, what are you doing? You need to be acting because I need to be acting. So demonstrating that is really important. And lots of people are saying also that it's part of bids that they're going for, and to get funding, they need to demonstrate their commitment. So a plan does that clearly. And using it to work with suppliers and stakeholders to deliver targets. I do sustainability in the event sector, as well as with small organisations and all sorts of organisations. And the amount of times when people have said to a supplier, make this event eco, or make this green, and people go off and do all sorts of things because that's what they think, and it's not clear. So having clarity on exactly where you're looking to take action and exactly what you're looking to address means that you don't have inconsistencies with your suppliers and your stakeholders. And there's the social benefits, because at the end of the day, the climate crisis is a human crisis and it's affecting all of us. And the climate crisis affects the poorer and the more, the less socially robust the most. So it's important that we see this as an opportunity to actually, and I'm going to use the awful term, level up, to actually see this as a way of actually addressing a lot of the social inequalities that are in our communities. And this doesn't need to be a separate plan, but you may need to update your existing one, especially if you're going to be working towards Bristol's 2030 net zero targets. And just for clarity, in case anyone's not sure, net zero is about working to make sure that the emissions that we are putting into the atmosphere, no, we're taking out more than we're putting in. And the idea is that net zero is about reducing your emissions, not by offsetting, but by addressing your existing emissions and looking to decarbonize where possible. So it's really important that net zero is not an offsetting agenda. And obviously, if Bristol's got a 2030 target, that's a great stretch target to work towards, and it's much more demanding than the UK government's 2050 target. So creating your action plan, where do you begin? That's always the hardest thing to consider. So starting with a net zero by 2030 is a great long range target, something as a headline to then say, okay, teams, how are we going to get started? But there's other things. There's lots of existing initiatives for inspiration, and there's a huge list of these in the guide. One of the good examples is the science-based targets, and I'm going to use the example for SMEs because it's really simple, I feel. It's a 50% reduction in your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So these are your fuel emissions and your direct heating and cooling emissions, and 50% is easy number to work towards. If you're a larger organization, you need to work out what your science-based targets are. And when I mean science-based targets, what science-based targets are about working towards your the science-based principle of not allowing emissions to go above 1.5, or global heating to go above 1.5 degrees. So keeping our emissions to within the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees. And the science-based targets had two they had a below 2 degrees and a 1.5. And actually they found that most of the organizations who signed up to science-based targets are working to the 1.5 degree standard. So they're actually going to phase out less than 2, which demonstrates that there's so many organizations who are committed to making bold changes within their organizations' ways of working. And there's also lots of other pledges and initiatives that are relevant to your sector. So there's lots of the declares ones, and these have got huge lists that you can then, well, not huge, but like good lists of things that you could approach which are relevant to your sector. So culture declares, tourism declares, business declares, and there's lots more. And we'll hear from some of the people that we worked with what they used actually for theirs. Now, what I do with organizations I work with, and what I did for myself as a small, very small SME or a freelancer, was to do a prioritization exercise. So I identified all the big I did it for sustainability as well, but also for carbon. So all the big carbon emissions and the big issues, and I listed them all out. So for what I see as big issues in the world, in my industry, and for my organization. And then I worked out on a scale of 1 to 5, what things were the most important to me, and then what were the most, where I had the most control, and then the ones with the biggest number were the ones that I've prioritized first. And for me, my climate actions are all around reducing my digital carbon footprint, because that's something I have a lot of control over, and it's something that is a big issue for online organizations, especially now that we're all working remotely. And I also identified in terms of the social issues, the huge disparities of income in the environmental sector. And so what I looked at is how could I address that? And for me, that was about being able to offer scholarships to my online training courses so that frontline campaigners can get free access, because I think it's wrong that so many people work for free in the environmental sector, whereas then consultants get paid a lot of money, but the people who are actually on the ground get paid less. So that's one of the ways that I approached it. And gaining senior leadership buy-in, not applicable if you're a small organization, but if you are a big one, this is can be a stumbling block. So senior management is vital if you want to make change. So how do you go about doing this? Having a senior member on your green team is ideal, or find a senior team sponsor or a friendly ally to help review plans so they get them over the line with those people in senior management. If presenting your climate action plan to the board, you might want to think about your business case, and these are some things to consider. What does your business care most about, and what is its core purpose or mission? I won't spoil it, but I know that Sam from the Bristol hospitals, he aligned the climate issues with health issues. So how can you make sure that how you're talking is in the language that matters to your organization? And where is your business most vulnerable to climate change? So what areas would it make sense that you take action now, because actually you might not have a business in the future? And where could taking climate action actually help you to gain a competitive advantage? Lots of people in senior management are motivated by their organization being the best, being the leader in the field. So how can you frame it like that? And what climate action do your staff, customers and clients expect of you? So if you can find that out through surveys, you can also say, look, if we don't make these changes, we're going to lose business. And you know, that's again, what are those motivations? And where might climate action help you improve efficiency or reduce costs? And if you actually see here, we haven't, this one is actually, there is the last one is about moral legacy. So what could motivate your senior team? But here we haven't said about trying to convince them about the environmental benefits. And this is one of the things that I always say a lot to people is, you can't, if people don't care about the environment, don't try and talk to them in the way that you talk about it. Talk in their language, so see what will matter to them, and it'll achieve the same goal, but trying to get everyone on the same page may be a lot slower. You'll find if people start to take action and they start, then you'll see changes. And I've seen with organizations I've worked for, people will have their own light bulb moment, but you just need to start moving them forward anyway. And then engaging your team members in the climate action plan. Okay, so people need a sense of agency. They need to feel that this plan, they had something to do with it. Now, it might be a bit difficult to get everyone in your organization to sit around and create a plan. Death by committee is the thing that I sort of hear in this, and that was something that a few people I spoke to said, that actually bringing everyone together was a bit too much, but doing it in some different ways, but always so that people felt that they had some level of engagement. So having a core group of people developing it and then seeking input from other people, so asking for their feedback once it's kind of drafted. Having a green team with a representative from each department, so everyone has got input, and where there might be silo working, you can address that. Focus groups, so you can hold those with different departments and ask how they would achieve those targets. And asking teams and departments to come up with their own targets and actions and put those in their own planning processes. So it's not just sitting with you or with a few people, it's actually being embedded into the organization. And considering a trade union representative if that's relevant. And then once the plan is in place, it's really important that you communicate regular updates to people. People get demotivated by long-term in the future goals. They need things that are happening in the short term. So breaking things down, so you've got short-term goals and saying, hey, yeah, we achieved this. And one of the organizations I spoke to, the Diocese of Bristol, they said they would send pictures, and there would always be a newsletter item. So thinking about, you know, we planted some trees, or we've done this thing. They said it's, you know, a lot harder to demonstrate things like energy reduction because you can't see it so much, but keeping people in the loop means it stays at the top of the agenda. And the more people hear about something, it means it's deemed to be important by the organisation, then it'll be deemed to be important by them. And also framing it as a social issue, not just environmental. For those who aren't motivated by the environment, this is a social issue as well. So it's fine to focus, well, and it's really important that you focus on the human benefits to it. And what are these? How can we incorporate social justice? So the climate emergency is an opportunity to address these social inequalities if it's framed as a social issue. And it could be used to reduce division rather than increase it. And I use a case study from Dane County in the USA, not in Bristol, but there was a project where some scientists, environmentalists were trying to get people to reduce their energy, and they were talking about energy savings, and they collaborated with their health department, and they said, hang on a minute, this is an equity issue. This is about social justice. This is about not making it worse for the people who are on the front line already in our community. This is a chance to make it better for them. So let's frame it like that. And so there's so many benefits, and especially in Bristol. And the first one to my mind is obviously air quality and the active travel benefits for your local community and staff. People in lower socioeconomic groups are always the ones that are most affected by air quality because they live in the areas where people are going past commuting, and it's always the people who are more affluent who can leave the city and who can drive a big car and drive their pollution in. So how can you frame it as something that's for the local community? And obviously there's benefits of active travel for staff. Could you directly support local community organisations with their climate and ecological priorities rather than donating lots of money to offsetting schemes far away? How could you actually use funds to help people locally? And including diversity, inclusion, and inequalities and social value in the decision-making process is really important. So how is this action going to affect other people? And committing to support the wider Bristol community when reviewing things like waste. So donating materials to scrap store or to excess food to charities. And finally, I haven't covered everything that's in the guide, so there's still some things for you to look at, and this is what's included. Suggestions on what to include in your template. So there are some lists of things that you can put for your headings. There are links to existing initiatives. There's examples and suggestions for engaging staff before and after you've created a plan, and clarity on how to create a smart target. In addition, there is the guide to monitoring and measuring carbon emissions, so you can set your baseline data. And there's links in there to carbon calculators and how to create a baseline data. So for now, I'm not going to answer questions because you're going to have a chance to ask questions to myself and the panelists at the end, but you can obviously put any in the chat. So I am going to stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Livvy. It's so helpful to hear your insights and get that overview and think about how to break the whole process down into those more manageable steps. I would now like to invite Zac Nicholson from Alec French Architects and Sam Willitts from University Hospital Bristol NHS Trust to turn your cameras on and unmute yourselves to join Livvy. Zac and Sam have kindly agreed to share some of their experiences of creating a climate action plan through an informal Q&A. So over to you, Livvy, for the first question.
Okay, so let's see if I can do this and not have it covering the screen. No. So I'm hoping that I sort of refreshed my memory from the things that we talked about. So I'm hoping these things will, the things I'm asking, you'll be able to answer them as eloquently as you did the first time round. So what I think one of the things, and what I'm hoping is in some of these questions that I'm asking, they're some of the questions that people asked pre-event. So one of the things would be great to hear from both of you is what frameworks did you use to get started with your action plans? And if we start with Sam, would you like to share how you approached it?
Hi, good morning. I guess the key framework and the key driver was the One City Plan carbon neutrality by 2030 target. So we had the One City Plan was a key focus, and the fact that we had signed up to that gave us the basis of the organisation's commitment to the 2030 target. We also used the Sustainable Development Goals as a wider than carbon approach, because it was part of a sustainability strategy, not just a climate one.
Lovely. And over to Zac.
Morning. Well, first of all, I wish I had a different background. I wish I could be outside in Bath with glorious sunshine in the background, but it's quite drizzly, misty and grey out there. So I'm quite jealous of your background there, Livvy. But I guess as a starting point, we're ISO accredited practice. So 9001 and 14001 for environmental management systems. So we enshrined a lot of things that we did within our 14001 accreditation. And as part of that, we then used the bioregional One Planet principles as an overarching holistic view of what we needed to cover. And that covers both our design work, so that's our practice work, but also the business itself, the office and commuting and all of that sort of stuff. So we use those two generic aspects to kind of encapsulate everything that we needed, really.
And in terms of challenges, everyone is obviously always fearful about the challenges and how to overcome them. So one of the things that I remembered from our conversation, Sam, was that obviously you'd set an ambitious 2030 target. Did you, when you were going to the board or when you were trying to get this sort of, elevated, did you come across any challenges of on getting this through, and how did you overcome those?
So I think, well, the 2030 target in itself, I think, is a massive challenge. But what I think is useful is people go from thinking, oh, well, this is really difficult, to asking the question, how do we do this? How do we achieve it? And rather than, oh, it's something off in the distance that we don't need to worry about, like the 2050 target. So I think that immediate shift to how can we do this is a crucial bit. And in taking it to the board, the key bit was aligning it with the trust objectives and framing it as a health issue. Particularly air pollution was the bit that was a sort of immediate understanding of health impacts, and then bringing in the sort of heat waves, flooding, and those sort of health impacts of those. But very much it was core to what our organisation was about, was a crucial bit for getting it through the board.
And then Zac, you're working with lots of different targets. You've got long range targets that you're working towards. What advice would you give to others who are looking at big targets, and how are you approaching setting your targets at Alec French?
That's a really good question. So setting the baseline is probably the first key to know exactly what you're actually dealing with. Know your trajectory. So where do you want to be at which points? So if it's a 2025 or 2030 or 2050 target, and setting some key performance indicators as well to know when you're actually making good progress against each of those individual targets. The other thing, obviously, we're looking at the One City Plan, but also bioregional as a overarching strategy. But there are other aspects that we've pulled in as well. So we're part of the Architects Declare movement, and that has its own targets as well, which impact our business. But there's also the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge as well. That has its own metrics involved, and that deals with some of our design work. I guess just coming back to some of the points that Sam's just raised there as well, probably the hardest challenge is probably staff engagement on a number of these things. You'd think it would be the easiest thing in the world to try and change people's perception and to change the way that they do things for small tweaks and adjustments, but that can be the hardest. And some of the bigger targets, like going to a green energy supplier or whatever, is actually really pretty straightforward. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and I think when one of the things you said was that for some of your targets, you've got sort of 100% reduction, and others you're doing 10% year on year. And I think that's a really helpful thing for businesses who aren't sure, like, how do I set a target? How do I even know? 10% is, once you've got a baseline, comprehending 10% is kind of easy to think about, isn't it?
It is, yeah, absolutely. And that's all about knowing your trajectory. So in 2025, where do you need to be? And then working it back from that. So if that's 100% reduction of whatever it might be, then actually working it back into more manageable bite-sized chunks, whether it's 10% year on year cumulatively, or if it's larger chunks. So some of our reductions have been around 20–25% per year. Again, cumulative, then yes, absolutely. Some are easy, so those low-hanging fruit, grab those as quick as you can. But some of the other ones, yeah, 10% could be quite a challenge, and it gets harder and harder the longer you go down this route as well.
Yeah, because it's 10% cumulatively, isn't it? So you can't just say, oh, we'll just do the same thing again this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any other challenges that you wanted to share, Sam, that you overcame or that you're working on overcoming?
I just picking up on, I think, yeah, the baselining is still one we're struggling with. 72% of our carbon footprint is our supply chain, and we do it it is very complex, and there's thousands of suppliers. And actually doing it on calculating on a financial basis doesn't give us a clear route forward, because we spend more, our carbon footprint goes up. So that link to actually how we engage with our staff, I think, is focusing on actual individual suppliers, and issues like single-use plastics is where we can make progress and kind of develop case studies. They don't necessarily feed into our translate into our carbon footprint, but they show that we are making progress, and will build into that wider picture as we develop a way to actually map that carbon footprint and be able to set targets against it.
And I think it's just worth saying, for organisations, if you're smaller organisations, suppliers sit within your scope 3 emissions, and it might not be the area where that you focus on the most. And the thing to do is to think, what are your biggest impacts as an organisation, and focus on those, and not get too caught up round the edges trying to address everything. So kind of making sure you've got a scope for what you're working on, and not trying to do everything. So I think that's a good segue, actually, when you start talking about, you're talking about stakeholders and staff. Do you want to share how you have engaged people within your organisation into the frameworks and your action plan? So should we start with Zac? Let's go back again.
Yeah, okay. So staff engagement, Livvy, as you've already mentioned, really, we set up a green team, and that's a cross-section through the business, including director all the way through to assistants. Not only does that give us engagement at board level, and hopefully quicker actions and decisions on making some changes and some shifts, but it also engages people all the way through the business. It motivates people because they're part and parcel of that change. It's not just one or two people trying to push it forward. It's the whole business trying to move in the same direction. I mean, other things that we've done, we've had green weeks every year. So a specific week of the year where we push forward on a number of different aspects all at once. We've also done tree planting, and actually tree planting is a great way of engaging people. If you say, well, your footprint at work, including your commuting, including all of the activities that you do for the business, equates to 30 trees. You need to plant 30 trees in that one morning, or whatever it might be. That's actually quite fun, and it's important to keep it fun as well, because otherwise people will turn off. So yeah, keeping it fun and engaging is really important, and enshrining it within the business itself. So it's enshrined within our ISO accreditation, and that gets monitored and measured every year. So I think that's key as well.
And over to Sam.
Yeah, so we've got, I suppose there's the kind of embedding it in the organization side of it, and in our processes, which has involved actually building a team. And it started off, there was 1.5 of me, and we're now about 11, 12 of us in the team.
Wow.
So it's actually having that capacity to support people in the organization, and setting up all the processes. So we have work streams, looking at different aspects of our sustainability strategy, which include staff from lots of different areas. So you know, we're making sure we have clinical staff involved as well, that it's not just sustainability or administrative staff. And then we've been running the Green Impact Awards for many years, which is supports green teams and celebrates their successes. But there's lots of, I think it's linking it to lots of smaller things, and we have a nature and well-being photography competition that we run monthly, and there's a staff allotment, and we have active travel days. So it's kind of looking at all those different bits that might appeal to different people at different entry points to get them engaged and interested, as well as make it really core to our processes of, you know, if you're going to submit a business plan, it needs to be assessed for sustainability.
And am I right in thinking that you actually held an event to launch your climate emergency strategy or your sustainability plan? Yeah, so we have public, they call it Health Matters events, which are sort of big public events, and that was a great opportunity to present the plan to the public. But actually, we had a huge number of staff turned up to it as well. It was one of the last public events that we managed with lots of people, and that was really amazing, the number of people that came, particularly staff that were really interested in it. Some of the people who came to that event are now actually directly involved in the work streams in delivering the plan, so it was a really powerful way of getting people involved. And one of the things that we talked about was how you got because you've got your climate, your sustainability action plan, and your frameworks, how you managed to get people to adopt it within their own working. Do you want to just explain a bit about that? Because I was saying, oh, has everyone got a new climate action plan? So, I mean, within the sort of departments of the hospital, we're gradually introducing those to have divisional action plans, basically. So it's how they can do it. The women's and children's division now have their own action plan and their own green group. So that I think is going to be a really key way to deliver it. And if we can replicate that throughout all the other areas, it's going to be a really powerful way to do it. As well as we have kind of spontaneously groups of staff have set up. The anaesthetists are particularly active. They realised their climate impact, and so they've been really active in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions related to anaesthetics. And I think it's those groups that have appeared and supporting them to actually deliver their actions is the key bit, because it's all extra work for a lot of people. But what has amazed me is, even when you've got incredibly busy staff, it's something they really want to do. So I see the role of the core team is to actually enable them and support them to do that. And that's proving a really effective model. And one of the things I think you said was there was a bit of competition when you were saying, oh, well, this department's doing something, and everyone's, oh, well, if they're doing it. So kind of using a bit of competition to have some fun with people to make it more, yeah, not just you're bashing them with a stick saying get on with this. There's like, oh, you know, it's people are coming to it because they see other people taking action. And that's one of the things. There's a neuroscientist that I always quote in some of the workshops I do, and he says action drives beliefs. So seeing other people taking action drives other people to do it. And if they see people like them taking action, it's much more inspiring, because they think, oh, it's not just something for an environmentalist to be doing. It's about it's everybody, you know, oh, people like me are doing it. So that's really important, and really good if you've got diverse people involved with it. So final tips, what would you suggest to somebody or an organization who has limited resources, so they can't employ 11 people? What would you say you would suggest that they kind of consider doing, or a way of approaching it, their climate action plan?
I guess it's looking at others, copy what other people have done, particularly within your own industry, is by far the simplest bit. There's somebody out there who's already done it, and that's probably the quickest route to doing it. But it also, I think that kind of network of others is a really valuable bit, because you could feel very lonely, you know, in an organization where you feel like the only person doing it, but actually there's probably similar people to you out there in other similar organizations, and I think that's the sort of best route for support. But also I think society has moved on, and there are so many people who want to get involved with this that actually just starting to get the message out there, people will support it. Even if you are a small organization, people will give their time to help.
And Zac, your top tips?
Yeah, I'd probably say to keep it simple. Start with the things that you know about. And if you're short on resources for this sort of work, I would probably tackle the first things that are easily achievable first, and then scale it up. So if you start with a very, very tight scope boundary, it could just be scope 1 or scope 2 on its own, and start with those easy ones first, and then progressively over time you can add more and more scopes into the mix. Certainly that's what we've done. So we started just with scope 1 and 2, but over a number of years we've then progressed to full scope 3 as well. So I'd probably say, yeah, keep it simple. Start with the easy ones and then progress from there.
Great, thank you. And I think, yeah, the thing from what Sam was saying, there's so many sectors now where actually in order to achieve the change, especially in scope 3 with suppliers, it's about collective working. So you as an organization can't solve it on your own. So actually businesses are coming together and saying, okay, well, actually, in order to do this, we need to all work on this. So actually kind of breaking down those barriers and thinking, how do we do this collectively, is much more powerful. And I'm sure with things like Architects Declare, that's another demonstration of all these things, is where people are coming together to work on things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of scope 3 emissions, I tried to find an accurate carbon footprint for a pen or a pad of paper or whatever. It was really, really difficult, and we spent quite a long time on doing minute analysis of all of our scope 3 emissions. But in reality, you can cut it right back to, okay, where are our biggest carbon emission footprints, and focus efforts just on those things, because you'll get the better return from a carbon and biodiversity point of view on doing that, rather than beating yourself up over a pen, a ruler, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things with scope 3 is looking at where maybe you spend the most money, or the supplier that you spend the most money with, and just working with them rather than thinking about everything, like as you said, the pens and the pads of paper.
Yeah, I mean, again, part of our targets are looking at our supply chain. So whether that's pencil paper delivery, or whether that's food or whatever, and we set a target each year to say, okay, we'll have 15 or 20% supplier change year on year. So again, you're not tackling your entire supply chain all in one hit. You're saying, okay, let's make an improvement. Let's do a 15 or 20% shift to a green supply of X, Y, and Z, and do that year on year. And before you know it, you've tackled most of the big items there, really.
And actually, one of the things that Paul Marsh said from Eunomia, who I interviewed for this, was with their suppliers, what they're doing is saying to them, they're saying, okay, which of our suppliers are committing to a climate emergency, which have got working towards science-based targets, and using that as a benchmark. So not necessarily having to audit all the products that come from them, but just making sure and saying to those suppliers, look, we're giving you this warning. We will want all of our suppliers within the next few years to be committed to these things. You've got a year or so. If you're not in, then we'll be looking for somebody else. So that's another way of working with your supply chain, but we're not having to know about the minutiae detail.
Yeah, simply asking those questions makes suppliers think, and certainly that's what we found as well. Just asking the question, are you carbon neutral for a start? Where are all of your products coming from? Are they all FSC certified? Are they all fair trade, etc., etc.? Just that question alone instills a bit of change within, well, from our supply chain.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because at the end of the day, if more people ask their suppliers for those questions, the more likely they're going to change. And that's one of the things I always say is you don't necessarily have to change all your suppliers and say, right, we're going to go to the greenest person, because you're not actually improving the supply chain. If you go back to your suppliers and say, look, we want these products, if everyone's doing it, then it's creating that demand and that change. Sam, have you got any last closing remarks before we go to questions?
Well, I think that supply chain one is a key bit. It was last week, the NHS has said we will not work with suppliers that aren't going to be carbon neutral by our targets. I mean, that's a 2045 target,
Yeah.
But that is the entire NHS supply chain, which is billions and billions of spend. We'll be looking to implement that locally. So anybody who supplies us will have to have a carbon plan to achieve the targets. So I think it's basic business sense now. Anybody is going to have to have a carbon plan and a strategy to be able to work with a lot of organizations now.
Great. So I think that's a great place to end, because that means everyone on this call needs to start thinking about their climate action plan. So we're going to open up to questions. So please, I think the idea is that we turn on our videos for this section.
Yeah, thank you. So if you want to raise your Zoom hand and ask a question directly, you can click on the reactions button at the bottom of your screens and select raise hand, and that pushes those of you with questions to the top of my screen so I can spot you. Or you can post your questions in the chat. So would anybody like to start us off? We've got a couple of questions here, but let's go to Hannah, who, Hannah, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I just had a question about, I mean, you mentioned staff engagement, but I was wondering, do you include staff, like personal actions kind of in your organisation plan, like what staff eat, and you mentioned commuting and those kind of decisions, but I guess where do you draw the line between asking staff to change like all their personal habits and does that fall into your kind of action or your organizational action plans?
Zach, do you want to maybe start on this one?
So yeah, I mean, you need to include commuting, travel. That's a given, and that can actually be quite a big carbon footprint on its own. And there are lots of ways of incentivizing people to travel more sustainably. Commuter aspects, so you know, there's lots of grants and things like that out there from Sustrans and from Business West, etc. Some of the other things that we've been looking at is for foodstuffs within the office itself. So whether that's for our CPD food or for business lunches, that needs to be vegetarian and ideally vegan, locally sourced, and also seasonal. So that kind of impacts on what staff are eating in the office. But the other things that we try and influence are things like the meal deals that people buy every day. So as a business, or we used to, before going to remote working, as a business, we need to deal with all of the plastic that might come into the office from personal purchases. And we try to influence people to limit that. We did also do surveys a few years ago about individual home aspects. So the CO2 emissions for all of our staff, we did a survey and see how actually we're doing as a group of individuals as well. But beyond that, it's very difficult to try and influence staff members to change their personal habits. So whether it's about changing from a normal kind of electricity and gas supply to a green one, etc. It's very difficult to change that from a business point of view. So that's where we kind of drew the line, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting area of how do you influence staff, and I think and actually their impacts on the rest of the population. As health staff are very influential in terms of persuading others to change things. A focus for us has really been on health and well-being, and actually changing the way people travel to more active travel is completely about health and well-being. Diets, again, health and well-being. So not necessarily pushing it as the climate message, but actually pushing it as it's good for you. I think has been the strongest way of doing it. And then on things like buying renewable electricity, I think it's, if the organization shows it's doing it and is clear about why it's doing it, that will hopefully filter down to individuals' decisions. And I think some of it is actually, it's kind of the other way, is the reverse of actually staff in their own home lives, things that they can actually bring into work as to what they're interested in. I think the single-use plastics bit is one where we've got a lot of staff who are really committed at home and are horrified when they come into work with the amount of single-use plastics they have to deal with. So in some ways it can be the other way around, that actually it's the staff that are influencing our plan rather than us trying to push it on them.
I'm just going to jump in with travel. So pre-pandemic, an organisation I work with, City to Sea, I looked at their travel for staff meetings and things, and most of that was done by train. And then but I was aware that lots of people pre-pandemic flew, and so we looked at that, and the difference between what people were traveling for work and their actual personal travel. The personal travel had a significantly bigger carbon footprint, and luckily there is a campaign called Climate Perks, and thinking about asking people why do they choose to travel by plane is often because they don't want their holiday time to be eaten up by overland travel. So as an organisation, you can help them to travel overland or by boat by giving them extra holiday. And so Climate Perks allows you to pay the difference between what it would for them to fly to take the boat. So you can make it positively available to people that they could make that choice, because thinking about why are people doing those particular behaviors and how is work actually a barrier to change is an area you do have influence. In another organisation I was working with around travel, we looked at why people were commuting, and rather than saying, oh, you need to, you need to cycle, we actually asked, like, what are the reasons that you do this? So taking that research point, and it turned out that lots of people took their children to work on their way to work, so they were using the car for multiple things. Or actually, they live in Bristol, their meetings were up hills, it often rained. So we realized that actually the travel, some of that travel wasn't the best place to put up the energy. Actually, the best place to put the energy was for staff meetings. And so all staff meetings, the priority was that they were done on Zoom, and it was only if it was like a workshop or it's something where people needed to be together that they did that. So it's important for you to think about, where have you got an opportunity to engage, and where is the work environment affecting people's choices.
Actually, if I could just come back on that, Livvy. Sorry, Zia. One area of influence might be if more and more staff members are working from home, so remote working and all the rest of it. From a carbon point of view, the business still needs to allocate carbon in association with home working. So actually, that might be a route path to influence more members of staff to change their energy suppliers to a green one, as an example, because it'll all bump the overall carbon footprint up of the practice generally.
And there is a I can't remember what they're called now, but there is a carbon calculation you can do for home working. So you can just, there's some easy ones and some less complicated ones, and I can actually share a link if somebody does want that. So you can just work out how many hours they spend at home, and there's some sort of averages that you can use. So yeah, that's lots to think about, but you just need to work out what's your scope and not get overwhelmed by all of it.
Thank you. I've got a question in the chat, and then we'll go to Play Wooden, who has their hand up. So Amy Oxley from the Bristol Zoological Society is asking that they're saying we're developing a code of working with suppliers, and this question is directed at you, Sam. At what point do your suppliers have to have a climate action plan by, i.e. do you have a deadline to say, unless you have a plan by X date, we'll find another supplier?
So what we haven't got it yet. We've started by asking the questions. So the first question that went out to all our suppliers was, do you have a carbon plan? So it was just a straight, are you, and if not, when will you have one? What we're planning on just gradually building that up, and actually using the national roadmap, which has a similar set of kind of questions, and gradually ramping up of demands that by 2045 we will not use any suppliers that are not carbon neutral. So what we need to do is translate that into a shorter time frame, but it gives us a basic roadmap of how you ramp up that action and that demand on suppliers. But I think the real key bit is setting that direction. This is the direction, and by this date you will have to be net zero, and laying that out, and it makes it very clear to suppliers that that's where we're going. But also in a supportive way. It's looking at how we can work with them to develop plans. So I think it's still evolving, that kind of roadmap, but it's gradually ramping up with a eventual target point.
Thank you, Zac. Livvy, did you have anything you wanted to add on that? Oh, you're muted, Livvy.
Sorry, I was looking for the carbon calculator thing on the internet, silly me. I think I was just thinking about the Eunomia one. I don't want to speak for them, but I think they were sort of saying maybe if they're working to 2025 or 2030, that they would be asking people to work to that. So I think it's whatever you're working towards, you need to make sure people are within that.
Thank you, Zac.
And yeah, I'd probably reiterate that really. I mean, we have been a carbon neutral company for a number of years, and in terms of our suppliers and that chain there, we will be looking for them to be, fair trade, FSC, and all of that sort of stuff, and to be progressing towards carbon neutrality. In terms of the time frame, we don't have any overarching policies, as Sam does, for the whole supply chain to be carbon neutral by a certain date. So we fix those ourselves internally. But it might be a difficult decision if you've got a very, very good local supplier of X, but they're not carbon neutral, but they're working towards it, versus a national supplier of X who are carbon neutral, but it's being flown in from wherever. That's quite a difficult decision to make, but certainly one to have. And we wouldn't necessarily rule out using a local supplier because they're not carbon neutral, as long as they're working towards it. I think that's the important thing.
Great, thank you. Playwood, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, but I invite you to ask your question.
Sorry about that. My name is Oluwa, and I'm one of the director at the Playwood CIC. Playwood is a small social enterprise that has the ambition to try to achieve what you big guys, and trying to do in terms of to provide a positive impact to the climate change in our own way, because we design and make wooden games and trying to encourage family to think wood when they think of gift, or they think of toys, or school themselves when they think of alternative provision to think wood. So we provide all of that service. My question is, in our sector, it sounds like to me, I just want to know more in details in terms of your engagement with local business. It's gonna be really tricky. It's gonna be really difficult, because the local business, they're flawed of import products to deliver their service to anyone, starting the fact that more than 70% of what you will find in our shop, they're made in China, for instance. And the fact that the possibility to, for example, for us, that we are environmental friendly, small social enterprise, that we're supposed to be using, for example, an electric van, because we're still using a diesel van, and that really creates an obstacle to our mission. But we cannot do that because the price to afford a van is really big. So if we want to work with an organization that has a policy that we need to be, carbon neutral, to understand that we have a really big obstacle that we're not in the position to really solve. So what is your plan for small local suppliers? Because you don't want to kill the local suppliers, because that is the reality we are living in. I just want to know more in details. What are your plans towards the small local suppliers?
I'm going to thank you very much for that question. I'm going to invite one person to answer that so we can move on to the next part of the agenda. Zac, you talked a little bit already about local suppliers, so I wondered if you had anything to expand on that.
It's a difficult conversation, really. It's a difficult decision, rather. We would have a preference for a local supplier over a national or an international supplier, simply because it makes good sense. Your local supplier chain is your neighbour, and all of that sort of stuff. We'd want Bristol to prosper and survive through all of this climate change that we're going to endure. So I think it's more getting the message out about what you're doing as a company and how you can improve on things going forwards. Shifting to an electric van is great. Shifting to an electric bike, possibly even better, depending on the size of your products and things like that. But to probably just have that dialogue. So we have the dialogue with our suppliers, and our suppliers are relatively small scale compared with probably what you're dealing with, and certainly what Sam's dealing with as well. But we have that conversation, we have that dialogue, we understand where they're coming from, where their elements are coming from, and from a business point of view, that's relatively straightforward. For our design work, it's a different kettle of fish entirely. So the projects that we design, whether it's a school or mixed use or whatever it might be, the supply chain for those projects can be national, it can be international. There are products coming from all over the place. So we probably look at a material sourcing strategy for those projects to reduce that impact overall. So yeah, we do feel your issue there over local sourcing versus international sourcing, but it's probably just about dialogue. I'm not sure that really answers your question, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure if Sam has any hints or tips on that one.
It is tricky. I mean, I was thinking we have a duty under the social the Act. We have to, from April, 10% of our criteria has to be in judging tenders is based on social benefit and net zero. So that is going to give us scope to consider the wider aspects of being able to use local suppliers, but it's very much tied up in our procurement rules. There are some ways we can look to work with local suppliers in terms of call out times and things like that we can do, but it's trying to use our procurement rules in a way that helps. And I think the other bit is, yeah, we want to work with local suppliers, and it's just finding the ways to do that. And I think there are also going to be, I mean, in terms of the things like, I know, the clean air zone coming in, there will be support to be able to get electric vehicles. So I think there are going to be financial routes to get support to be able to move in this direction. But that's looking to kind of government and local authority and other routes to actually helping SMEs to be able to move in the right direction.
Thank you very much for that. If you have any questions that haven't been answered, do get in touch with us and we'll try to address them at a future event. We've got a short video to play for you now from the Climate Leaders Group, and then we'll wrap up and go to the networking. So the Climate Leaders is a group of organisations who've committed to being carbon neutral in their own operations by 2030 and have a plan in place of how to reduce their emissions. And we asked them to share their organisation's first step on their climate action journey, what challenges they've faced and how they've overcome them, as well as their top tips for other businesses and organisations looking to get started on their climate action journey. We'll share some information about the Climate Leaders Group in the chat, and do get in touch with us if you'd like to find out more. So my colleague Claire is now going to show you this video.
Bristol's businesses are taking action on climate. Bristol has set a goal to become a net zero city by 2030.
The Bristol Climate Leaders Group is a group of 30 businesses and organisations who are all leading on climate action, and we've asked them to share insights into their journey with you.
One of the first steps that we took here at the SS Great Britain was to set up a sustainability working group.
We decided to invite a high-profile speaker to come in and present to our staff and our clients about climate change.
Measuring our energy, water and waste outputs enabled us to make informed decisions on reducing our environmental footprint.
Initially, we focused on low-hanging fruit, such as removing old oil boilers, installing LED lighting and replacing inefficient fleet vehicles.
One of the things that we found really particularly challenging was actually looking at what our carbon footprint is and actually doing the calculations for that.
For me, one of the biggest challenges I've found is just finding the whole thing a bit overwhelming. But one of the ways that I've found helps with dealing with that is to break it up into smaller sections. And then you can start by tackling the easier things. And once those are done, you've built up a bit of momentum and enthusiasm to then start tackling the more difficult things.
As a team of one in an organisation of 900 people, there's obviously a limit to what I can do. So much of my work is integrating environmental best practice and climate responsible decisions across the organisation.
The biggest challenge we face in reducing our carbon footprint was knowing where to start, which is why we commissioned the creation of a carbon route map which will detail carbon outputs throughout the hospital.
Hire a single dedicated person who has complete oversight of sustainability in their role.
Do something, switch to 100% renewable supplier or start generating your own.
Engage with your colleagues in management to understand their perspective and priorities.
Bring everyone on the journey with you. I think it's so vital that those on the ground are at the very beginning of that ideation and solution process, not at the end.
Plan it properly, make it part of your whole strategy of your business rather than just paying it lip service.
All environmental improvements that you can make are really important.
Choose something that you can do easily, no matter how simple or how small it might seem, and just do that one thing.
It's key to ensure that you have all of your stakeholders aligned so that you are all moving in the same direction.
Have a real look at where your biggest impacts are.
Create your own green team.
It's only by working together that we will achieve our climate goals.
We need every organisation in Bristol to step up and do more on climate action.
So no matter where you are in the city, which sector you're in, we need everybody to get involved. We can only do this if we all work together.
Thank you very much to the climate leaders for contributing to the video, and to Livvy and Zac and Sam for your insights this morning, Claire for handling all the behind the scenes tech, and to you all for coming along. I really hope you found it useful and motivating. And do stay on for the networking if you can. It's a great chance to connect with others and embed some of the learning from the event this morning. And do complete the feedback form, which we'll share in the chat. We're really keen to get your views and ideas. For the programme to be as useful and impactful as possible, we need to hear from you, and we want our activities and resources to be shaped by the challenges that your organisations are facing. So do share what you found useful today, what your main takeaways are, and anything you would like to see covered in the future. And we'll also post a link to the full guide to creating an engaging climate action plan in the chat, and we'll be uploading this to our website today, and we'll include it in the follow-up email. So do keep an eye on our website and mailing for further events and resources. We'll have more climate action breakfasts coming up, and we're in the process of organising the next Intention to Action clinic, which is focused on employee engagement, which we've covered a little bit today, but it seems like a really important topic for everyone. The Intention to Action clinics are interactive and solutions focused events aiming at enabling organisations to tackle particular barriers they're facing in reducing emissions. And I would also like to share an upcoming event that might interest you. Bristol City Council, the One City Office, WECA and Business West are hosting a business-focused regional COP26 Green Zone hybrid event at We the Curious and online on Thursday, the 4th of November from midday till 5 p.m. And it is part of the government's Together for Our Planet campaign. So we'll share more information in the booking link in the chat. We've now got around 15 minutes for some semi-structured networking. So we'll open up small breakout rooms for smaller discussions. This part of the session won't be recorded, so feel free to turn your cameras on and speak freely. Please start by introducing yourself, and we have some suggested prompts for your conversation, which are: what did you find useful from today? What are your main takeaways? And what's the next thing that you need to do to move your climate action plan along? can be overwhelming to think about the big picture. So just what's the next step that you can do this week, this month, or even today to move it along. So over to Claire for the breakout groups, and thanks again for coming. I hope you have a lovely day and see you soon.